Hello, welcome to the Networked AV Power Hour. My name is Cecilia Poek, Live Content Manager at AVIXA. Before we begin this discussion, please note the following. If you are viewing live today, you will receive one CTS, CTSD, or CTSI RU credit. It will appear on your transcript within 5 to 7 business days. For any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. You will have access to this recorded webinar at avixa.org/webinars. You can also access other Power Hour webinars at the same link. Today, we'll be discussing the current state of AV over IP. Are we really converged? Our panelists today are José Carceller from QSE, Laurent Magia from Netgear, Paul Müller from AVI Systems, and Pete Stackman-Coleman from PTS. And now I'm going to hand things over to our moderator, Tom Kerr from Almo Pro AV.
Okay. At first, I wanted to define convergence. We'll take a brief look at how we are, We'll take a brief look at how we're transporting video today. What are our current AV over IP options? What is the current state of interoperability? I'd like to briefly explore system architecture and wrap up with maybe we have a problem on the horizon. So I'm going to take this first part here, and I'm going to start this story with my 7th grade social studies teacher, Miss Muchler. She insisted that we all buy this particular edition of Webster's New World Dictionary, and I still have it. So let's look up the word converge, and it says together, or to come or bring together at a point. So this is kind of my first part of this. If that's the definition, are we really converged? Any opinions?
I think this is where you play the sound effect, the wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
I think, Tom, I mean, as the definition states, I mean, to bring together at a point. So I think there is some form of convergence, but we're not fully converged. So for me, the definition of the current state of convergence is that we're utilizing the existing twisted pair cabling infrastructure, where it's existing. We're using essentially the same cabling infrastructure in AV world as we are in IT world and for other systems. However, if we're talking about fully converged, we're talking about all systems operating on the same network, one network controlling and supporting various technologies. So we're not there yet, depending on where you are around the world. Some places are more advanced than others. My experience in the US is that we're probably in single digits as far as percentage goes of networks, being fully converged.
Yeah, I don't, go ahead.
Sorry, Tom. I think we're kind of mingled or mixed together, but not really converged and walking together all the data and everything. There are some places where they just plug the networks in and they're working together, but they're not really converged and working as it should be expected.
All right, so if we are kind of bringing together at a point, what's the point? What is that single point? What would that be?
Where we are now?
Well, I'd say it's the Ethernet switch. If it really is coming together, bring together at a point, that's the Ethernet switch. While we manage AV systems on a network, until we are truly moving content on that same Ethernet switch, I would say we're really not converged. And it's funny, how long have we been talking about this AVIT convergence? How many years ago was it the Infocom show had the theme AVIT convergence? So, I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time, but it's kind of, my opinion, really not converged yet.
Maybe, Tom, I should then say that similarly to my fun fact, AV is really dangerous for IT networks. Most of the time, I get it, and Pete was right, maybe in the single digit or 10% of the cases, audio is actually traveling in the existing IT networks. But when it comes to video, it can be destructive. That would be even criminal in most instances. So together, but maybe with some nuances, like islands in an ocean, you know?
Yeah, and moving audio is easy. Okay, that's the difference between riding a bicycle as compared to video, which is a dump truck full of rocks by comparison. It's just enormous. But
That's
it's
right. And this is really about, you know, the capacity for the existing networks. By the book, those networks are not designed to be line rate, you know. You sleep, Tom, all the time in your network. And that's why the access is not capable of, you know, being line rate to the core. It's an oversubscription. By the book, 20-1 most of the time. So video cannot be queued. Video can't wait. So that's why.
yeah, and I've mentioned this before in other contexts. We're using the network for something it was never designed to do, and that's real-time traffic. You know, and other things. Why do we even use category cable? Well, because it was cheap. We just hijacked the medium. I mean, Cat 5e is so cheap, you guys have used it for pull string. Okay, I know I have. And this is typical of AV. We just hijack a medium and put whatever we need to do on it.
I think it's also the most common cable that's installed within, if we're talking about enterprise networks, it's the most common cable type that you'll find installed. So it kind of makes sense to utilize that infrastructure. And also, you know, AV, let's face it, AV has been proprietary almost from day one, where, you know, everyone comes up with their own systems and ideas and cable and so on. So I think it's a good thing by whether it's hijacking or you know, using common sense and using that existing infrastructure. I think that's for the greater good of everybody.
Yeah, and I think at some point, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, that's, I think, one of the big issues for AV is we want to belong. Every time we get into the building, it's at the end. It's all these different things that we want to be part of the, you know, what everybody else has been doing. And this, you know, again, was a way of going through and getting brought into the party.
I think you just described most AV people's experience in high school. We just want to belong. Yeah. But at some point, I think we're going to have to get standardized. And this gets into some of the points that we're going to get into later.
And I'm sorry, I think there's another big point that you were saying is that we're trying to send something that the networks were not designed for, and that actually not even the IT guys understand, which is real-time media, because they have done video conferencing and other stuff, but that's always compressed. So the reference is voice over IP, and it's a compressed audio stream. So it's a bicycle, but it's also like a small picture of the bicycle. It's not even the whole bicycle with the rider. And we have to transmit that bicycle on real time, and it has to get on time to the right places. And they don't understand that part. They know that they can have some jitter, they can have some latency. And in the professional audio and video industry that we're in, we need to have everything real time. Everything has to get in order, and everything has to get on time. And the guys from IT don't understand that. So they think that voice over IP it's real time.
But here's the nice thing that I think is getting understood is, one, we're getting into these conversations on the AV side a lot sooner than we used to. And that in turn has become an interesting thing where upper management, the people who are writing the checks said, hey, I really want this technology. I want to have it brought in here. Those conversations are driving budgets, and those budgets are causing a redo of the infrastructure that's inside of there. So a lot of these IT groups are all of a sudden seeing us as allies that we can go through and talk about the fact that, wow, we can go through and push all this new technology, like you said, to the core, getting the switches, getting everything brought up to date, and then have the possibility of supporting these technologies we're describing.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of them still go on 1 gig. And I think we're going to have to get out of that 1 gig mentality is my opinion. All right. Point 2, because I know the clock is ticking here. How are we currently transporting video? How are we normally doing that now?
Right. I think it depends. Once again, it depends on where you are, which region you are located in. I know from my own experience that in Australia that we've been using AV over IP. A lot of universities just adopted it as soon as the technology was sort of stable enough. It wasn't just sort of brand new. And they've been installing that for the last 4 years as a standard in universities as their preferred means of transportation. My experience here in New York is that pretty much everything has been HD-based T. It's starting to shift, but it's certainly a number of years behind, as I said, in Australia in particular.
Yeah, that's kind of the punchline to that. We're still doing HD-based T. Yeah. Lauren?
So maybe let me add, because of course, HD-based T used to be prevalent. It's actually going down, it's out there still, but a lot of analysts, you have those consulting company like FutureSource in the UK, for instance, they just said that the transition to AV over IP is the early majority stage. So we are actually getting there. But the answer when it's not HD-based T, the answer is a combination of compressed and uncompressed, right? Because HD-based T by definition was perfect quality, uncompressed kind of, and zero latency. That's HD-based T. But when it comes to IP, you have those two camps, compressed or uncompressed. But in both camps, even if you go the affordable, or let's say 1 gig, you said we stick to the 1 gig, gigabit to the desktop, gigabit is everywhere. Even if you do stick with the 1 gig, you still stream 10 of those streams. You're in a 10 gig world, and most IT networks are not even capable of delivering that. So that's the big question, compressed or uncompressed, isn't it?
Yeah, and this goes back to what are they trying to do? Okay, and let's take a long-term view at something. What is going to be our long-term infrastructure to be able to support these signals that we're trying to pass? And I remember way back in the day, when we were getting out of analog, starting digital, everybody and their dog had their own proprietary digital mechanism. And then one of the other guys and we just happened to catch this Valens video one day, one of their extremely early videos with their 5-play convergence over a spool of Cat5e. And it's like, what? And then everybody latched onto the Valens chipset. And at first they didn't admit they were doing HD-based T, but eventually everybody was doing their own flavor of HD-based T, which is another problem. Just because somebody says they have HD-based T doesn't mean they implement all 5 pieces of HD-based T.
Yep.
All right. So say we're making the transition, Pete, more so there in Australia to AV over IP. And this is something that I wanted to take more of a look at. So AV over IP, what are the ways I can currently move AV over IP? Can you list some of them? I'll start with this one. Okay. When did that come around?
I was actually going to mention it before, Tom, that I was having conversations 12 years ago, right, about AVB, and that was going to be the next big thing. They pretty much had the A worked out, but the V was a problem, and the V took seemingly forever, and then that ship has really sailed, but yeah, I mean, that's 10, 12 years ago. Oh, 2009. There you go.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, at this point in time, we were still installing plasmas.
Mm-hmm.
That's when AVB came out.
Yeah.
And you had to have the AVB enabled switches to even make it work. So yeah, AVB was going to be the next best thing. All right. What else?
H.264, 265.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of things like AVB, NDI. What else can you list?
SDVOE.
SDVOE. Yep.
On the audio side, you need to quote the AES67 variants, being Dante and of course QSys from QSC.
Well, yeah. Okay.
And I would say, yeah,
and you remember
the video.
And you remember years ago, this has been years ago now, Dante said they could start moving video over Dante. Anybody seen that in the wild?
Sure. We've seen that with several actually manufacturers who were probably first. They call it that Dante AV. That's another kind of video transmission. But yeah, in order to organize this list, we should actually go, audio on the left, video on the side, on the right.
I'm not worried about audio. Audio is easy.
Oh, so on the video side, I would actually say MGPEG 2000. That's another one compared to the highly compressed H264 and 265.
Right. I was just thinking about the different different manufacturers or protocols. Brought up QSys, obviously.
Because that gets in something that everybody does their own secret recipe mixing between JPEG and H264, H265, and different compression methods. And I think that's one of our issues, that nobody's doing like a standard. Everybody's doing their own stuff.
Really?
And just using some kind of recommendations or the best thing that they think they can do better than somebody else.
Surely that would never happen in the AV world, Jose.
and I guess that's why maybe Dante AV could be some kind of standard, because most people use Dante as the audio standard, and probably they would try to go over there. But again, every manufacturer does their own stuff.
Well, and since I was part of AVIXA for a while, I try and be careful between the difference of definition of a standard and something that's not actually a standard, but people use it all the time.
There's very few.
2110 is a standard.
Yeah, there's very few items on that list that are actually standards.
Right.
So you're right. SMPTE is a standard, but that's not really related to a Pro AV per se, right? This is more of a broadcast technology.
Yeah, now, I think the only part they're missing really is HDCP, content protection. I think that's the only piece of the puzzle they're really missing at this point.
Right, which they really have no desire to get into.
So one could argue that SDVoE was presented originally as a standard, but you're right. It's more of a common hardware platform with a common software platform shared amongst manufacturers. But well, I must say, because we are on standards, there is another initiative, couple of them actually on the market. One of them is IPMX, which could be an open standard. Yeah, you're right. So this one could check the box too.
So I would look at these, and we haven't even listed all of them. Okay, there's probably easily another third I could add on here pretty quickly, easily. And it's like, wait a minute. As an industry, I think we're still acting like AV companies. Our own personal, this is the way it's done. So when you start thinking about all of this, are we really serving the industry? Well, I say the industry, the end users and buyers of our equipment and technology and experience and all the things that we do. Because, okay, I've got an HP laptop, and I don't know what brand you guys have, Dell, Lenovo, whatever. I can send an email on this HP. It goes over the internet and it arrives on a different brand of machine at your location, and you have no problem opening up and reading that email.
Can you imagine if Cisco brought out a new handset and said, like a telephone handset, and said, look at our new handset. These are all the features. By the way, it only works on our switches. It would never happen.
Yeah, but don't we already have mobile phones that are different inside of that and what you're talking today? We still haven't fully pulled that together. The underlying technology, to Tom's point, is the underlying technology. That's what still is working.
I can call you on my iPhone 11, and you can pick up on an Android, Samsung, or whatever you've got, and we can still have a conversation.
Right, because we found a gateway in between.
Right. We do not have the same thing in our industry. Exactly. This is one of the things that drives me crazy. And I'll be blunt. Why haven't we gotten our act together yet?
I think it's the manufacturers looking at trying to lock someone in. You know, they turn around, they say, this is our suite of product, and they try to get them in. And once they're hooked, then it's like you can't really go anywhere else, right? Because you typically don't have that interoperability between competitors' products, between their products and a competitor's product.
Right. And I don't blame the manufacturers, because they do want to own the room. If I were a manufacturer, I'd want to own the room. I'd want to own the campus. I'd want to own the company, you know, all of their rooms and everything else. Can this continue this way?
No.
That would be my feeling, is we can't continue to build all these little personal kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also, as we were talking before this meeting, the AV industry is still very hardware driven. So once you design a codec chip, you cannot update that to do something else and try to work with some other manufacturer, or it becomes really expensive. And now that we're moving more to a software-based world, it's easier just to update the software. We were talking about OBS, and OBS can do a multiple cameras, USB cameras, IP streams, multiple things. And the next software version will be able to use different codecs and do different stuff. And I believe that we're still in an industry that we're still very hardware based, and we cannot shift from one thing to another, or try to add functions from other manufacturers trying to be that kind of bridge.
But I remember back in, say, around 2007, 2008, you had IP, we were talking about security cameras, IP cameras came out. And the manufacturers had that same sort of fortress mentality where they turned around, and Sony cameras would only work on Sony DVRs, and Panasonic cameras would only work on Panasonic DVRs, and so on. And then another company came out, I believe it was Milestone, that made a product that could talk to all these cameras. And then eventually those walls were broken down because everyone, it was just, they thought it was a stupid idea. And now there's interoperability. You don't need to have the one platform, like the same camera, the same DVR these days. You could use any manufacturer and chop and change. Why is an AV like that?
Well, aren't we starting to see the beginnings of this, though, in the control system side of things? Where, again, to your point inside this, Jose, it was the idea of, again, we've got programmers who are sitting here writing in more common languages than the proprietary ones being put out by the manufacturers. Mm-hmm. And we're starting to see them finally moving into that space to say enough is enough. And it opens up a whole host of new people who can start getting into this industry because they understand JSON, they understand PHP, they understand Python, they understand all these different things.
Right, and you already have the common denominator, don't you? Right, because the network, at least you can say that TCP/IP and Ethernet network, LAN, WAN, Internet, everything is already standardized, and all these different devices, they still respect those rules. They still go by their RFCs of some sort. So you're right, with the control on top, like an API, giant environment, managing and allowing for a control, that would be a very first step. But don't forget, that basically the network already is the common denominator. So that should not be too hard. And my other contribution real quick would be, don't you think that instead of looking at standards, always standards, it's hard for standards to keep up with innovation. So maybe also we could hope for this industry, the market should decide, at some point, which one of these items on that list, would become kind of a leading force in that transition.
I think it has somewhat, hasn't it? I mean, certainly for audio, and I think really we're seeing that with video as well.
Yeah, I've certainly seen it with the audio. And Pete, who do you feel is leading as far as the video?
By far, SDVOE. I mean, they've got, I don't know how many manufacturers signed up now. Last time it was 51. It's probably up to 55 or more now. I think it's only a matter of time before the other big players out there sort of get on board. I mean, at least you have that interoperability between. It was just like HD-based T, same kind of thing. Everyone got on board the chipset. Yes, there were some, you know, everyone had a different kind of flavor, but you could get video and you could get audio there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of leaning in the same direction with SDVOE. First off, it's 10 gig. Okay, so I can get more throughput, which we're going to need. So, but until I actually see manufacturer A with an Ethernet switch in the middle, going to manufacturer B box on the other end, I would say there's no interoperability. There really isn't. I mean, that I think is where we need to get to. And you're thinking SDVOE is going to kind of be the, not standard, I want to be careful with that term, but kind of the default
pseudo standard.
In common usage as compared to others.
The market should really decide. And,
yeah, I agree.
Founder of SDVOE, I would actually also lean towards that, but I'm also recognizing that, you know, it's uncompressed most of the time. So the market acceptance is, you know, often on the compressed side, because if you have a big video wall, you are going to magnify those artifacts, you know, that compression might create. But if you have other applications, latency can be okay, quality not big of a problem. It's not a huge video wall. You know, compressed video makes total sense too. So, you know, this is really important, actually. I believe that applications should lead. But go back to a Paul point, control and management, unifying, it's, you know, probably the key. We should aim to that faster. You already have those touch panels and handheld systems that can do a hell of a number of things across a maximum number of audio and video AV over IP technologies. And if we meet up next year at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if you would see more integration on that.
You know, when InfoComm changed the name to AVIXA, Audiovisual Integrated Experience Association, 3 keys to that lock, right? Content, space, technology. Now, we've been talking about the technology. That's all we've been basically talking about here. That needs to come, I want to say mature, but that's not quite the right word. We need to come to consensus as an industry as to what we're going to use on the technology side. That would be my preference. So now that we can actually, if we get that settled, we can actually spend more time with the client and work with them on their content and their space to make sure that people can actually see and hear the content, to make sure that the actual space is comfortable for the humans to be able to have that great audiovisual experience. I mean, we get all wrapped around the axle on the technology all the time. I'd like to be able to, one way to do that, and we're kind of done with it, and then we can concentrate on the content and the space so that there is a better overall experience for the people that are the consumers and users of the technology. I mean, that,
and that experience that extends into things like flexibility, right? Adaptability within a space. So by putting all these devices on the network, and if you had a digital ceiling or had a lot of cabling and everything's operating over the network, well, I have flexibility. Data is data. I make sure I have enough data available, and it doesn't matter if it's a speaker or a screen, or it doesn't matter what I'm doing. Everything else in the digital workplace now is connected to the network, right? So we should be leveraging that as much as possible, leveraging the cabling, leveraging the switch technology in there, and getting that interoperability. Granted that you may need, typically need a software layer to bring everything together so they can all talk, but it's there. Why aren't we using this infrastructure more?
I'm with you. This, we were talking the whole compressed, uncompressed infrastructure. I'm going to change my order here a little bit. Because this is kind of my thought coming up. All right, this was, when was this? March of 2020. Sony introduced a 16K TV. We haven't even finished installing all the 4K displays yet. Yet they're talking and showing 16K televisions, right? Here's an IEEE article that I ran across from May of last year. Why go for an 8K television when the 16K can be round the corner. And 8K TVs are, and regardless of the discussion about there's no 8K content, okay, we can all agree on that at the moment. 8K TVs are already less than $3,000. If I go down to my local big box and I have a choice of HD, 4K, 8K televisions, they have a choice of as many 8K televisions as they do HDs. Now, granted, the vast majority is 4K, but still, I can go down and buy an 8K television today. But then we start talking the whole compressed, uncompressed. All right, so 4K 60, you already know this at 420 8-bit, 8.91, 444 8-bit, 17.82. So if we're putting this on a 1 gig infrastructure, we're compressing it close to a 20-to-1. But then let's watch the numbers. Okay, 8K 60, 420, still at 8-bit, 32 gigabits per second. 444 8-bit, 64.15 gigabits per second. If I go to deep color, and who doesn't want deep color? Hello. You're almost at 100 gigabits per second. And now I start pulling these 16K numbers. 16K at 60, 444 12-bit. Somewhere in the neighborhood of about 385 gigabits per second. Okay, and you take a look at the network infrastructure. A lot of people still seem stuck on 1G. The next step up is 10G. All right. So, and the next steps up from there are what? 25 and 40.
Mhm.
Okay.
And 100.
And it seems to me that the resolutions and stuff are way outpacing what is going to be the network infrastructure for the moment. So if I upgrade to a 10G infrastructure, and in the meantime, 16K comes along, I'm compressing it somewhere near to a 40-to-1 compression ratio.
And you're still thinking on 60 frames,
Yes.
not higher refresh rates. Like all the gamers now are looking for 120 or even more.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten into that. I'm just still thinking at 60 frames per second and getting my mind blown at the numbers.
But also on the flip side there, Tom, is that there's a lot of people out there that are more than happy to watch a movie or live TV on a device like this or something slightly larger, right? That's heavily compressed. It's not the same resolution that I'm going to get from an 8K or a 16K screen, but it's good enough, right? We don't. This is the thing. It's good enough for what we need. And it depends on the application, right? Like, so maybe there is a requirement for a 16K somewhere, but is that the typical application that we're talking about? No, it's not.
Well, don't forget what I mean, all this comes basically out of the consumer market anyway. That's what pushes all of this. I mean, and this was talking years ago when they were going to have the Tokyo Olympics in 2020. They were going to do limited 8K broadcast already. So I said earlier there wasn't any 8K content. Actually, they were going to do some limited broadcast in 8K.
I was going to say they did, but it didn't happen yet, right?
Not yet.
No, but NBC has committed 8K in the production that they're doing for this.
But don't you think that first, maybe we should remove out those numbers the HDMI overhead, which you really don't need to transport on the network because the overhead can be, compiled on the other side. So, take the 4K 60. It's the 1782 gig per second. It's actually 12 millions.
Which is what SDVoE does in a lot of their stuff, is they strip off the blanking and everything else for the transport.
Along the way, that's the same. But you said the IT infrastructure will not keep up. I'm pretty sure, Tom, that you didn't see the road to leading to the terabit mountains at the Ethernet Alliance, did you?
No.
So, of course, you and I will be retired maybe when it will reach the terabit Ethernet, right? But on that road, you have the 100 gig widely available today. 40 gig Ethernet should be good, for 8K, but for the 16K on that road, you have the 400 gig, and even higher speeds in real soon. So I believe that the IT infrastructure should keep up. After that, Pete is right. I mean, the number of applications that might require this would be, probably not the vast majority. That's the least we can say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 10 gig is just kind of getting affordable now. So I'm wondering if the Ethernet, the 40 gig, 100 gig, whether that will even be affordable by the time these resolutions roll around. Because this is kind of my thought with this. Where are the diminishing returns in this that you require so much compression that the image actually looks worse at the higher resolutions?
Well, and let's also make sure we get the understanding again of the limitations physically of what happens with these. As you get into this, your cable lengths start getting shorter and shorter. So
and
how are
you're
you
probably not
doing
it over copper?
That's exactly it. Now you've got a whole new infrastructure to pull through.
Well, not only new infrastructure, you're also talking the connections to the devices.
Yep.
Are going to have to be fiber.
Mm-hmm.
So and you can do PoE, power over Ethernet over fiber. We didn't manage to do it yet,
Yeah, there's also that other stuff that now we want to have everything packed in small devices and powered over Ethernet. So that's also another limiting factor in the technologies, that usually all the video devices consume a lot of power. And now we're going up to, instead of using PoE or PoE plus, we're starting to need PoE plus plus and higher power ratings to get those plug-in devices that do all the stuff just in one box, getting rid of that AC outlet. And we're not going to be able to do that over fiber.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, PoE plus, love the stuff. So are we headed towards maybe a Siamese cable that is
it sounds like a fiber and copper type thing?
It depends, like I said before, it depends on the application. If you need to transport that much data, i.e. video, then maybe your only option is to put fiber in. But if you're talking about typical workplaces, they don't have that requirement. So there's always got to be that compromise. So do I go and put some sort of form of, I call it proprietary cabling because it's different from the majority of the cable, a twisted pair. That's the only reason why I say that. But do I go and do that, or do I keep it all the same? Right? Do I keep it all the same? So I have all my cabling. I've got it run by one contractor. It's all tested. It all goes back to the same place. It all runs through the same network infrastructure. I've got power over Ethernet as well. I've got less power out in the field. I mean, there's so many benefits by keeping copper infrastructure there. I think on a whole, that by far outweighs any fiber connectivity, unless you have an application for it.
I'm going to tend to disagree because I think we're going to run into a resource issue on this that's going to say getting all that copper together and doing it, the price is just going to go too high.
I totally disagree with that. We're doing projects now that are fully converged. AV is just one piece of this pie, right? It's one of 15 technologies that we're designing that are getting installed, and everything is being powered. It's all sitting on the network, and it's all being powered from the network. And preferences from a design point of view are given to those devices that do sit on the network and that are powered on the network. So as I said, it actually saves money by doing it that way. You've got less switches because you're more efficient with your switches. You got less space in the rack. You got less power. You got less cooling. I mean, there's so many benefits from having a fully converged network.
And actually, when you're talking about power, you can also get power conditioning and backup on just one site. Mm-hmm. And you can make sure that all the devices are backed up and not having multiple things coming offline when you have power outages. We do a lot of hotels, and that's one of their main problems they have. But we're still not able to do power amplifiers that are PoE++ or something like that, because you cannot have a 4,000 watt power amplifier run over that cable. But I think many things are trying to converge to go to the network, because you have also that only one resource and one data center where you're trying to connect everything. But where we were going is that I think that now all the AV stuff have fallen on the IT side of just being in charge of having all these things together. And as Tom was saying, they're kind of in charge of the technology, but they don't know anything about the space or the more AV stuff, the more artistic side of things. So they just care about the technologies. And I think that they don't understand really the requirements. So they just say, okay, I have a MacBook that has 4K resolution, so I need projectors doing 4K, and I need to transmit 4K on all the network. And they're not really seeing the real requirement that probably they could be streaming 1080p, and it's more than enough because they're doing PowerPoints. And I think that's where the AV people need to go in and help them a little bit to understand both the technologies and the space and the requirements that they really need to do, and not always go to the high-end car. So just because there's like a Tesla Plaid or a Bugatti Veyron, it doesn't mean that you need that to transport the CEO from one side to the other. So you can get a smaller car and get him from point A to B.
But isn't that where the consultant comes in there, Jose? When they turn around and that's their role to talk to the client and identify what the requirements are and recommend the right hardware for that application.
Well, maybe that's a point. I know there's a huge gap between the US and other countries, but in 99% of the rest of the world, there are no consultants. There are just.
I wouldn't say it was 99%, but there is different paths to market in different regions. I agree with that. In a market like New York City, there is a lot of consultants involved that design digital workplace experiences like ourselves. And that's our role. Our role is to understand IT, AV, and every other technology that goes into the workplace. And we become that conduit to the IT team where we're working with them to say, this is what I would recommend for these reasons based on your requirements.
I would look at this totally different. I would look at it from an end user standpoint. I have my laptop and it is 4K and I have a 4K display or a 4K projector. And you're telling me you can't get my 4K laptop from here to there? Why not?
Well, it'd be like driving a Lamborghini in New York City, Tom.
I don't think that really matters to the end user, though. It would be the expectation. And I think a lot of it is driven from consumer, the mindset. Hey, I've got this, I've got that. Why can't I get from here to there?
But that's what I'm saying. That's the role, in my opinion, that's the role of the consultant to set those expectations. Yes, you can buy that product, but you want to do this. Well, these are your options. You can get fiber there and we can do it if you want, but this is the downside to it. We can do it.
I'd be like,
you forgot something, Tom, and it has to be over Wi-Fi.
Come on.
but therein lies.
Why are you laughing? It's actually working. Actually, I was doing that yesterday. I mean, you can stream using various techniques on your Sony or Samsung TVs already using Wi-Fi, and it's actually Bonjour and DNS driven. And but back to the hybrid or fully converged installs, right? In New York City with Pete, it is still not the majority, because it really requires a brand new architecture that is, planned in advance for it, based on the AV requirements. The IT team can receive the requirements and build a fully capable line rate super network. And that's nice. But when it's not possible to do that, then AV teams must have a strategy. Did you hear, I was said that not time ago, that a lot of AV teams now in enterprise or even government, they report into IT now, because of that AV over IP transition. That's misery. No, it's not. It's not, because it's not a war, right? If the AV team can clearly stipulate the requirements, the IT team should keep the rights they deserve to manage, to control the entire inventory.
Yep.
But please please, it's really important not to fully converge in an existing network when it's not possible anyway. Better to build, you know, another AV network and just interconnect so that you can have the control, you can have the snapshots, you can have the live super compressed mini videos that you can have on your phone if you're on the other side. But please build a capable AV network with, you know, certified switchers, all the service and the support that must come with it to accommodate all those codecs. Because Tom, you did a long list. Never forget that all these guys, they require certification. Jose at QSC requires very strict certification process at the UNH, right? In New Hampshire in the US, for instance. And when the network is well done, it's going very well, but IT team can manage it all. So I would call it a AV network, you know, managed by the IT and with control and out of band in between.
So this, you're advising a separate AV network, and that advice is coming from a guy that first time he plugged into a network, he brought down an entire government network. So I think you've got good advice.
This is absolutely right. And you know, I can tell you a quick fun story, and after that I shut up. A few years back, did you know that the US American school in Europe, in the Benelux region, the entire campus was shut down? Do you know why? Because one kid said, oh my God, I have VLC player on my tablet. I can stream, I can share my movie with my friends. And he did. And do you know what happens when multicast IGMP is not properly managed on a corporate campus? Do you really know? It is broadcasting the damn thing. And it took them a fair amount of time because when everything is shut down, that's really hard to put it up back.
You know, and Netgear and some others now are shipping out the door some AV friendly switches with IGMP snooping engaged and all those kind of things to make AV over IP implementations a lot easier on site, getting very close to plug and play. All right, we're starting to run out of time here. I wanted to hit on one more thing because I thought that was important. This came up in our last call, and this is the system architecture. Where is the switch? Now, AV guy here, AV designer, I'm used to having the switch, whether it's proprietary, HDMI, RGB, HV, Ethernet, AV, I'm used to having the switch in the room, which is different than a structured cabling architecture where all ports, all the network connections go back to a switch in the IDF. So
never, ever, ever, ever deploy a switch in an enterprise network outside the telecommunications room that's secure, it's cooled, it's powered correctly. But the three things that the IT people look at, the top three things that they look at when we're talking about networks, number one, security. Number two is security. Number three is security. Top three. Never, ever, ever put a switch or a device that acts like a switch. We do not. There are manufacturers out there in the AV world that build switches into their devices, and these devices, a lot of these devices are designed to actually go out in a meeting space. As soon as we see that architecture, gone, red line straight through it. And that I'm talking about enterprise networks here, just to be clear. But we do not allow any of that kind of architecture out in the field. And we talk to these manufacturers and we tell them how they need to change the design and why they need to change the design if they are expecting these devices to sit on a client's fully converged network.
So that's the case of fully converged, not like what Loren is taking or talking about separate AV networks.
There's no need to have air gaps. I mean, the thing is, we can do it. We are doing it. Right. It's been done not just by us, but by other people and organizations around the world. And you have one person who manages it. One of the biggest reasons why the IT teams don't want to touch it at times is because they look at the security threats of these devices. You put them through a vulnerability scanner. Oh my God. Like some of the biggest names in our industry fail miserably on these vulnerability scanners. And it's a risk. And these IT people who are managing the network are going, you're not putting that anywhere near my network.
That's
Excellent.
right. That's why you want to segregate all
No.
that into an
No,
AV specific.
no, the manufacturers need to manufacture products that comply. Let's not pander to them. Let's tell them and educate them of what they need to do to improve their product to get it compliant. The IT makes compliant products. Why can't AV make compliant products? And then if you force them, if you turn around, these big organizations start sort of getting the big stick out and telling them that they can't do it, then maybe, just maybe, and we're talking to them every day, they are making changes to comply. That's what it's about. It's not about trying to segregate them and we'll just put them on their own separate network. No, get them on the network, get them compliant.
Well, I think there's another factor that needs to go into this too, is again, when we start talking about the enterprise customers and things like that, you're starting to get into the works of business management. They're trying to go through and figure out what's happening to the people, the counting, understanding the utilization of the resources that are happening inside that. And that doesn't happen when you have to pass it through that small pinhole gap of jumping between network A to network B. They do not like to do it through and do that. So Pete, I'm with you on this.
Yeah, and I think, well, one of the things that we still have as an industry is that we still have like the AV gear and we just stick there a network port. So we're not really a technology that is integrated on the network. We're just sticking a network port on the projector or on the control system, and we're not fully integrated. And that's why many of the manufacturers are not able to comply with all the security stuff, because again, they are hardware based. So you have the projector, it has a small chip that controls the DLP and everything. And they just managed to put in a network jack to be able to do some stuff over there. But they're not able to run software on that chip to do all the other networking stuff because it's not a PC, it's a DSP or a video processor that is trying to do something else. So it's not that easy to comply with that, as if you're running a PC with software and it's already running something that is more IT-centric.
We like I said before, the fully converged network will consist of about up to say about 15 different technologies, a BMS system, analytical sensors, lighting control, air quality monitors, you name it. Like the list goes on and on and on. They're not computers. Why can they comply and AV World can't comply? It's the same thing. It's an edge device. That's all it is. It doesn't need to be a PC.
You know, the AV industry hadn't been around that long, but yet for the short period of time that we've been around, we sure have legacy mindsets. That would kind of be mine.
It's true.
All right. This has been marvelous. I want to get to some questions before the top of the hour here. I'm wishing literally that we were all together so we could go out and like have a burger and shake afterwards kind of thing. But I am seeing some questions and I did see some of these. So we can handle some of these. Do you think we've moved towards convergence during the pandemic where upscaling systems has been critical, especially when supporting large files?
I don't think the pandemic has changed the architecture that we're moving towards. I think it's accelerated in other areas, but not necessarily in that area.
Actually, I was listening to somebody not too long ago, and they were doing IT help desk, and their IT help desk tickets had gone way down because everybody had figured out how to do like Zoom and GoTo and Teams and everything else. They'd learned to figure out how to do it on their own.
So, Tom, that isn't that the golden rule of technical support? Is it if you get a call coming in, you don't answer the call. If you wait long enough, they'll work it out themselves.
Right, but haven't we gone through, fortunately, and seen people now get a comfort level with things like this, that they're willing to go through and actually push the button and click that thing to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that it might not have happened for another 5 years if we hadn't gone through and done this and seen the generational change that's happening with people.
Familiar technology, though, isn't it? That's what it's about.
No, you've had to use it all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the pandemic's changed education, for instance, you know, overflow classroom, house of worships too. You need to stream outside more, you know, with collaborative experience in and out. So that has changed. But of course, it's not headquarters and large enterprise segments.
You know, and I'll take this, and I know we got to get to questions here, but the whole idea of having decent internet connectivity, a decent ISP connection to your internet service provider, you get a little off the beaten path outside of a city or something like that, man, you may not even, you know, you may be relegated to dial up.
Mhm.
Seriously. Okay. Up until 2.5 years ago, I was still on a DSL modem of all things. So you get outside, and this has affected distance learning. It has affected work from home. It's affected everybody that gets outside a typical metropolitan area. All right. John Flatterer. Hi, John. What are your thoughts on wireless communication for control of AV systems? What are the security roadblocks, if any?
I'll jump in. I'm
I figured you would.
yeah, look, I'm a bit biased, you know, like I have a background in cabling design and you know, an affiliation with BIXI. Look, if you can get a cable there, get a cable there. For me, the denser the city, the denser the location, i.e., you know, New York, there is so much wireless going on. In my opinion, my recommendation to all our clients is minimize your wireless connectivity as much as you possibly can. Wireless is typically wireless is a convenience. A wireless mouse, wireless keyboard, wireless headphones, they are a convenience. You want to try and guarantee your signal and your connectivity and your control and your security, you get a cable there.
Yeah. And RF is a finite resource. They're not making any more of it.
Yep.
That's another way to think about that.
Mhm.
So yeah. Scott, we are at the beginning process of a new building, which is the first time AV has been at the very first steps. You are a rare bird. We are considering AV over IP, but the AV network switch is going to be its own switch and not travel through the campus network system. This is similar to what Tom said at the beginning. We're not passing video audio control EDID HDCP on an enterprise network. Yeah. Lauren, I think that addresses what you were getting to.
Yeah,
It
well,
needs to be
if the
its own.
network, yeah, that's right. If the network is not just capable of doing it because you don't have the interconnect, you can think of your plumbing and your house, Tom, right? You might be very proud, but maybe there is a little section of, you know, water system tube under the house that is going to restrict the entire flow. And networks are exactly the same. So in that case, Scott might be saying, you know what, the network is just not capable of doing that. It's not line rate. It's a blocking network, and video will just use brand new, you know, optimized, certified AV switchers, and better for him in that case, because it's not a brand new, totally out of the box converged architecture. That's an existing infrastructure.
Yeah. And AV still largely kind of be in the wild, wild west in a lot of ways, having a separate, you know, demarc between the two networks. I would be much more comfortable. So I know that there's little chance that I'm going to affect the enterprise network, you know.
That's right.
I have to keep that up and going. What about SRT? And SRT, secure, reliable transport, is the question.
Right.
So what about HRT?
Right, that's a good
SRT.
question. What's about that? Well, there's a lot going on with SRT. Originally, you know, this was a so-called a standard for streaming, right? So for more on the one side of things, not really much something, you know, worth explaining or discussing on for the LAN side of things. That's absolute standard Ethernet. But for streaming, that's probably, you know, some renewed interest. You know, look at NDI, for instance, with NDI 5 and reliable UGP. SRT is one other possible, you know, technology for streaming that might be good because it goes through the internet. Yeah.
Exactly. It handles lossiness. You know, and again, it's another one that's been made available by a manufacturer free of charge to go through and be developed. So you are seeing different people coming in and grabbing it and attaching it onto their devices.
Yeah, the part that I don't like about that, another one. Regardless, how many different ways do we need to do this? When you talk about manufacturers owning the room, how many of you would be willing to use HD-based transmitter receiver from different companies? Actually, the HD-based I think, org website or in the installer's base, they actually have a whole matrix of, you know, can I use this box with this box? And that is how many of the parts of the 5-play convergence are you using? And there's even manufacturers going outside the 5-play convergence and doing stuff, which is just crazy. Just getting more away from standardization. What do you think about, what do you think of, sorry, they're from Argentina, so maybe I'm not reading this correctly. What are you thinking about live production like vMix software suite to produce, generate live video streaming? With the concept like new tech TriCaster or Waves audio mixer without bare metal hardware. I don't know that I quite understand that. Anybody get that?
Well, what the question is, what about, right? So, I mean, what's good to know, right? And this is exactly the same discussion we just had collectively. NDI can ruin an entire network. You know, MTCP or UDP. I mean, all that can be very. I mean, you can destroy a network. So either it's you know, Pete designing a brand new solid, rock solid architecture for fully converged, or better to keep the VMX server and all the NDI cameras on, you know, a specific sub network. Call it a VLAN, call it a dedicated network, allowing for control, but never underestimate NDI. Can be as, you know, even there's more compression, and so there's less bandwidth compared to SDVoE or MGPEG. Still, it's a lot of bits, you know. So this is the exact same thing. Everything we said during the discussion apply to NDI and VMX. Yeah.
It also could be coming down to the idea of the questionnaire was coming up with the idea of, again, how do we get away from the appliance factor of some of these things too? These manufacturers I was talking about inside of here, they're all working to be in the cloud or again, be virtualized in some shape or form. And that might be partially what they're driving at also. And that's reality of, again, how do we get away from that proprietary nature?
Right.
The last one here, only because of time, because we're like 5 minutes over already. When referring to compression, lossy or lossless compression, if lossy, how much quality are willing to compromise for bandwidth? And that really comes down to, what are you trying to do? You've got that codec triangle, bandwidth, quality, latency. Where's your trade-off? What do you got to give somewhere? All right.
Yeah, I was using the video wall example because I was said that not long time ago. That's very true. Just imagine a huge video wall. You know, if you compress it too much, you make it easier for people to see the artifacts because everything is magnified. You know, so that's
what looks fine on this, by the time you blow it up on a big wall, looks like trash.
Right. So that's the application. It's going to be good most of the time. The other one is the doctor in the operating theater. You know, if they are inside you cutting something, you might not want to have too much of a delay on the big screen, you know, in front of the doctor, right? I mean,
you don't want the buffering.
Yeah, that really could be the spinning wheel of death, couldn't it?
Being a French citizen,
that better be color calibrated.
I would not even dare. Speaking of that, but yeah, you're right.
I think there's always compromise when we're designing these kinds of spaces. There's always going to be compromise with the architecture, compromise with the product, compromise with the transportation. There's always compromise. It's not just about the AV, right? It's holistic. We need to consider all things and then make the best decision based on the information that we have and the application.
All right, we are over time. Paul, Jose, Laurent, Pete, I can't thank you guys enough for participating today. Hopefully we didn't make anybody mad, you know, including some manufacturers. So
we didn't mention any brands, Tom. We could have really dug the knife in and twisted it, and we held back.
Yes, and you might have realized that I did as well on the networking side of things.
Yes, we didn't do any commercials for our sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Ceci, back to you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I see lots of great comments in our chat. I think we had a great discussion and lots of information to think about. I'm just going to pass a few slides on, and we can go. This recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. Any questions, problems, please contact webinars@avixa.org for questions. The next webinar in this series will be on July 13. The topic is AV over IP, what you need to know before implementing. You can register here, avixa.org/webinars. Save the date for InfoComm this year in October. And that was all. Thank you so much for all for joining this webinar today. And I hope you enjoy it. Thank you all the panelists, and Tom, the moderator. I see you in our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.